Hello and welcome to Conversations with the Voice of Reason. I am your host, Benjamin Boyce, and today's conversant is Austin Padgett, who is a co-host along with Rudyard Lynch of History 102, which explores the power dynamics that have unfolded specifically more or less in Europe over the course of the last millennia or two. And in this conversation, we talk about Austin's work in the Libertarian Party and his historical view on current politics, specifically how the right is constantly under threat of going off course and getting mired in political details and infighting that don't address underlying issues of economic reality. He's a great guy. He's very knowledgeable. His show with Rudyard is really entertaining and informative, and I enjoy it thoroughly. You can find links to which down there in the description, as well as links to support this channel. Without further ado, here is Austin Padgett. One second. Everything sucks.
No worries. I'm just looking up a old tweet to remind myself of my own thoughts.
You don't keep like a concrete monologue in place so you always know what to say under any given situation.
Um, I guess they can be triggered, but I like to speak naturally, but also not forget points.
Yeah,
And I
yeah,
always
that's
forget
fair.
points.
That's
Everybody
fair.
does.
Talking natural. Speaking of talking naturally, when'd you get
hmm
into the internet?
After college,
Oh, really?
uh,
So
yeah,
you were like a Mennonite until that time?
basically, I grew up. I was born in America, and then I moved to France when I was 3.5 on my own volition because I was a fan of the countryside and Provence. Not just kidding. Yeah, my parents moved me out there. And then I was in France for a few years, in Singapore for a year, back in France for a few years. So I went to French schools. At one point, I spoke French better than English, which is certainly not the case now. Um, and then we went to Barcelona and then to upstate New York when I was 11. And
Jeez. Okay.
so it was kind of a rural area. So I lived only in European, Asian suburbs and then American countryside. My graduating class was 42. It's Washington County is on the Vermont border.
hmm
One of the more cows than people kind of thing we would say. And we didn't have internet. We got satellite internet maybe when I was like a senior or a little bit older, but it wasn't very good. We couldn't watch YouTube or anything. And then I went to college and I was always interested in politics. My mom was in politics back in the day. She was the special assistant to the head of the Treasury under Reagan
Mm.
and various other things. But I was never around anybody political because she left the DC network when she was one. So my only attachment to it was talking to her about healthcare, free market healthcare policy in high school. And
hmm
I wrote an essay about it for health class, put a lot of effort into it, got a B
Yeah.
minus for being off topic. So I was like, okay, I guess I shouldn't talk about politics for a while. And I went to college, and my dad was like, one of the two things he said were, don't 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 play rugby, which I never at all had in my mind at all. So I immediately joined the rugby team because the guys next to me were on it, and he also said, don't talking about politics is a great way to lose friends. And so I didn't really talk about politics much in college. I was a fan of Ron Paul and all that, but I didn't really research it. We had to read for school, and I already wasn't interested in those topics. But as soon as I graduated, I became
Mm.
a voracious reader, and that's when I got online. And within 6 months of being on Reddit, I was an AMCAP just from arguing with people and following like the logical chain. And then I started reading more books about it and researching into all sorts of topics. I was I my the main shows I watched. So after college, I moved to Asia and I worked in ag tech for 7 years. So I was in Singapore and Thailand. So I was this I never lived in an American city until I was like 29 or something.
Mm.
So my connection to American culture was through the internet for a while after college. Um, and I forgot my train of thought before that last tangent.
When did you start making things for the internet beyond
Oh,
Reddit posting?
I used to post a lot on Reddit, right?
Yeah.
And then, yeah, I saw how messed up everything was, and there's a little bit of a black pill dynamic when you start to see how messed up everything is and also develop ideals that are very far away from the world.
Hmm.
So after being into it for a while, I took a couple years off of politics and got off the internet. And that was really useful for me because it allowed me to re-center myself while also retaining the knowledge that I had gained. And then I dove back into it around COVID because
Oh,
I
okay.
was like mad again about that.
Hmm. Where were you at during COVID
I
times?
was in LA. So I
Okay.
just moved to the US. I got my apartment 3 weeks before COVID broke out, which would have been very hard to
Yeah.
uh, get a place during the middle of that because no one would see you, etc. So I got a little bit lucky with the timing there. Um, and that's when I met Angela McCardle, who's my wife, and she was involved
Any
in LP
any
politics.
relation to Angela Merkel, the German prime minister?
No, but I did see her in 2012 or so at the 20th anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall. I was in Germany for that. Um,
Huh.
but no,
So you
this is
just
Angela McCardle, former chairwoman of the Libertarian Party and
oh,
Donald Trump dealmaker.
okay. Are you guys? Is she doing that now?
Oh, did you? I don't know if you followed any of that stuff.
No.
Did you remember when Trump went to the Libertarian Party convention?
Yeah.
We had met with him a few months before to have
Okay.
dinner, and that's where that idea was spawned. Um, and that's where we gave him the advice to focus on Ross Ulbricht and also make a public announcement about freeing Ross Ulbricht at that convention because that's how you're basically going to win the room, etc. And then
Mm.
uh, the rest is history.
Hmm. Is the so you're involved in the Libertarian Party, or do you and your wife just have different politics?
Oh yeah, we're still involved.
Yeah.
I'm a hardcore libertarian and Trump supporter. So
Okay.
there's a lot of this like fighting in the libertarian community, and
You
I saw
think
these arguments on yeah, I saw these arguments on Reddit 10 years ago, and they also perfectly parallel the arguments between the classical liberals and um,
the
uh,
DR?
yeah, not and right wing non libertarians or
Yeah.
whatever, in a way that intersects in a really weird way. Um,
Really?
yeah, because like a lot of the classical liberals will be, I mean, there's so many. I mean, you've seen the chart. The right is so confusing. Whenever you try and put a label to it, things get kind of
Yeah.
confusing.
Yeah.
Um, but like you get to this point right where Fuentes is attacking JD Vance and then James Lindsay is attacking JD Vance and it's for completely opposite reasons. And so when you get into the friend enemy distinction thing here, my goal I want to keep the political momentum going because I think Trump has introduced real
Yeah.
radical elements into institutional politics. I want to keep that momentum going. Uh, and then people
Radical how?
people argue it over it for different reasons. Yeah.
Yeah. Radical how? What
Well,
is so
I
radical about
believe.
Trump?
About Trump.
What what he's
Mo
introducing? Yeah.
I would say mostly his focus on destroying the bureaucracy, which is something I believe Vance also understands,
Yeah.
especially given his background. Uh, and
And
okay,
is
let's
that
look at it,
possible?
some metrics, right? Like, well, I didn't think it was possible necessarily, but
Hmm.
I love impossible challenges. Um, a
You're a
lot of my
fatalist. Hence the
work has been oriented around that.
libertarianism.
Yeah, and I also love the Don Quixote, Impossible Dream. I did
Yeah.
it. I got into New York Allstate NYSSMA chorus singing that song, so
Okay.
I clearly attached to it emotionally in some way. And I think it's misinterpreted because you can apply that energy towards a practical gain. It's more about the romantic. You have to restore the romanticism before you can even attach it to a goal. Um, so I think that gets strawmanned a little bit. But
Mhm.
also I have a tendency to interpret things in my own way. So I
Yeah,
don't
you're
blame
again,
anybody for
you're
that.
a libertarian. So, so one way in which Trump is radically altering potentially
Yes.
governance and perhaps politics to a certain degree, but governance itself is the restraining or destruction or erosion of the bureaucratic stranglehold.
Yeah, so one good metric I don't see these points get talked about on the right, but which I think is strange because it's the whole game. But Trump has already fired 15% of the federal bureaucracy. These
Mm-hmm.
guys are the federal um, bureaucrats who work at the regulatory agencies and make those rules. Now, I'm not talking about like civil servants and cop numbers. I'm talking about the the golden target area. Um, and he's on track to fire a lot more. It's I think it's 350,000 so far, 500,000 by the end of the year. Not only that, but he's staffed the tops of these agencies with people who are very committed to changing or decreasing their power,
Power.
and he's
Yeah.
created executive orders around 10 recent Supreme Court decisions that were only possible because of his selected judges that re-examine the legality of regulations around the 10th Amendment, basically. So Chevron and West Virginia versus EPA, cases like
Could you
that.
go over that the Tenth Amendment? But like,
Yeah, so a lot of this stuff goes wrong with the 1870 something interstate commerce clause, which allows the government to regulate interstate commerce. And then the Congress passes laws and then basically deferred all their responsibility to an unaccountable administrative state, which is basically like an engine of communist central planning.
mhm.
And it really expanded in the 60s through the 70s. And in 1970, the top four companies in any given industry controlled 20% of the market share. Today, the top four in any given industry control 80% of the market share. So the rise of oligarchy is directly correlated not to a loss of antitrust laws or something, but the expansion of the progressive bureaucracy. And spending ties into that, and the Fed ties into that because larger financial institutions get favorable loans from the Fed, et cetera. But the regulatory bureaucracy is really what entrenches corporate power in the form of the old guild monopolies, which is something I talk about a lot on History 102.
Hmm.
So that was like the lens that I had before, and I identified this as an important area. When I joined the Libertarian Party, it says, "What are your top two issues?" Right? They ask you that question. So I said, regulation, so that and education so that people are allowed to learn skills, and getting
Hmm.
rid of regulation so that people can apply that value within the marketplace, because without those two things you're not going to fix anything else. And there's so much opportunity that people don't understand in the regulatory sphere, because they focus totally on spending, which is dependent on Congress, which isn't going to do anything. So the best possible scenario, if Trump used all of his leverage, he could maybe get Congress to do a 1% spending cut, which is not going to do anything at all. And what we need to do, and what we need to help Trump communicate and help Trump follow through on, is deregulating, because if you reduce the price of medicine by 50%, if you reduce rent or housing by 30%, then you're cutting the federal budget by a lot more than you could ever do through Congress. This medical spending is 26% of the federal budget. You cut that half in half, which you could do with some very basic deregulation, then you've cut 13% of government spending. But not only that, you've cut prices throughout the rest of the economy. You've also provided people opportunities to create new careers. Um, and that's going to be a
Hmm.
big part of, I mean, it's a real challenge to recover the lost momentum of the millennials and Zoomer age because they've been put through these useless education systems and then spit out into uh, a soulless corporate environment or no job at all. So
Hmm.
it's going to take a lot to like retrain and relearn, and you don't want to be doing that kind of stuff when you're in your late 20s anyway. So it's a bit of a disaster. And every year we go
Really?
by without
Yeah.
fixing this stuff, millions of more people's lives go down the tubes.
Well, yeah, but
So
we
it's
can
like an
always just import
existential
skilled
emergency.
workers, right? There's no.
Yeah. No, you can't do that because it just puts a band-aid on it and gets you even farther away from where your own population can be a generative force at all. And it also suppresses wages, right? Which makes it harder to get people back into industries like construction, which we very much could do. I mean, I would talk to people in Thailand. I had a friend in Thailand who did a study abroad in Australia, and he was like, "Oh man, I can't believe how lucky the West is." Like, my dream is to live in Australia as a tile layer, or I forgot exactly what he said, some sort of blue collar trade, and that you
Yeah.
can make a actually really good living off of.
Yeah.
Like that's an amazing dream. And we
Yeah.
have that opportunity in the US. And so this is why I'm worried about growth through deregulation versus growth through AI. AI is great, like how it contributes to growth can be helpful, but if we just rely on AI for growth and don't deregulate the rest of the legacy industries, we're kind of going to be screwed because you have this increasing separation between tech, which is the only place the economy is growing because it's less regulated. And this can include some
Mm.
electronics and physical stuff as well. But and then you have medicine, farming, manufacturing, all the legacy industries that are construction that are really totally buttoned up. Like you can't even build anything without following the international codes set by this like random NGO that becomes the baseline for even local government standards. So every bathroom in the country has a silver rail on the stall. It's like it's all we don't even understand how centrally planned things are.
Hmm.
And this obviously contributes to the over standardization and ugliness of housing that often gets blamed on the market. And there's two dimensions to that, which is you want to prioritize shelter and space, but as some point you also prioritize beauty, and that's being artificially restrained.
Mm.
Um,
Mm.
so that was a bit of a tangent as
So
well.
can we kind of get a little bit philosophical or philosophical slash historical? Why are there so many regulations? Is this just human nature? Like the arc of empire is to eventually get swallowed up by its own bureaucracy? Because I'm sure this happens over and over and over again in Egypt, Babylon, etc., etc., etc.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we had a little exchange about this possibly where we talked about bureaucracy as a longer historical lens for
Mm-hmm.
communism or socialism, because these patterns repeat in many cultural
Yeah.
contexts and throughout
So
our
what
own
is
cultural context
bureaucracy?
through history.
What role does it serve? How does it like get entrenched and then tend to spiral into swamp like
Right. Because
qualities?
just to nail that down, you have Sun Tzu talking about it in or China a
China.
long time ago, or the Taoism guy, if I got that name right, um, about the more laws, the more criminals, etc. So,
Hmm.
um, but okay, so then you break it down into the legal system, right? Because you need laws, you need order. So one of the challenges that the developing countries have is they don't have as good of a legal system. There's two ways to quote unquote regulate. One is through common law, tort law, bottom up legal institutions and protections. The other way is through top down bureaucracy. People
Mm-hmm.
think of regulation as synonymous with top down bureaucracy, and they think that it's just a matter of more or less. And to a degree, as it relates to being tied up to dependencies, that's true, but it's not true as an end goal or as a state we've experienced in the past. And the challenge with developing countries is they often don't have very strong legal systems. Our common law system developed out of hundreds of years through small towns in Germany in the 1500s that created a good legal code that was adopted by the town next to it. So this process of adaptation, like language, laws like language, and
Can you expand on that? What inspired these little townships in Europe to codify law?
Um, I'm not sure exactly. I mean, maybe the
Hmm.
Protestant Reformation or something. I think it has more to do with how decentralized the landscape in Europe was, which it was
Yeah.
very broken up, but also united under a shared value structure, which is the golden goose. If you can have separate polities that are still united under a shared value structure, then you get the best of both worlds. Um, and so
That's what it
when
means to be separate but equal. Equal not in a outward way, but in like a formative way. Or
yeah, I
one way
mean,
you can interpret that. Yeah.
yeah, I don't even the left wing framing kind of pollutes that, but it's so absurd because like obviously nothing's equal. If you're born into as a lumberjack son, you're much more likely to do tree cutting than someone in New York City, um, or have
Hmm.
a tree cutting business. So yeah, that I mean it goes through all dimensions.
Yeah.
But so the developing countries have a problem because they don't have necessarily great legal systems. Some of the ones that were former British colonies have individual rights baked in. But if you don't have a legal system that's going to protect you, then it's going to create more demand for a government bureaucracy to deal with pollution, et cetera, things like that. But for the US, the legal system was very on top of pollution, so much so that the
Hmm.
origin of environmental regulations were in creating minimal allowable standards of pollution for the sake of industrial progress, meaning that you could pollute a certain amount without this apple orchard being able to sue you for coal, or without this fisherman association being able to sue you for this or that. So the
Hmm.
origin of and one of the biggest constraint in eliminating federal regulations is actually that it might end up resulting in being too strict on the environment based on how far away we've gone from uh, protecting some of these resources. And you can. I'm not advocating against technological development. You can development is completely tied to sustainability because working with natural systems is cheaper. It just
Hmm.
requires investment, knowledge, and technology. And there's also the side where you have gains in efficiency. For example, buildings have gotten 40% more energy efficient in the last 20 years. And that's completely due to a profit motive. And if it weren't regulated, it would be further along in that direction. Imagine if the government reduced energy use in buildings by 40%, say, especially when if it was 2016 and people cared about climate change more. Then they would can't even dream of 40% reductions, let alone accomplish it. But this is happening all the time due to you know, incentives. Um,
Hmm.
and then that's why I talk about China, like bringing manufacturing, low tech manufacturing competes directly with high tech manufacturing. A lot of people with low wages, very few people with high wages. It competes directly on an industry basis. So if we deregulated and allowed people to build stuff in under 5 year timeline in the US, um, then it wouldn't look like China in the US. It would look like the future. It wouldn't, it wouldn't be all the pollution, etc.
Hmm. So the way for us to return to competition on a
Hmm.
global scale, and especially in the future, I guess things are not terrible right now, but if you look at where they're headed, it's not pretty good. We need to reshore into certain
Yes.
industries, right?
Yeah.
And Trump is trying to, it seems that that is one of Trump's actual desires to
Yeah,
do.
if his executive orders are followed,
Yeah.
it's a actual revolution. And more directly, he's put his hands on deregulating energy and AI, which are two very important points. But a lot of this agenda has to be carried out through the agencies, and so they've done a lot of firing, and they're doing
Hmm.
more firing, but they haven't brought in huge numbers of rank and file people to carry out their agenda. So, say even in the DOJ, if they want to free somebody they have to get the lower level staff to actually carry it out, and they're not very cooperative, right? Same with
Hmm.
getting rid of a regulation. And so they can't bring anybody on. They haven't been able to for a while because they needed to get their appointments first.
Yeah.
And now they just got the second round of those recently. That was delayed because of the budget fights. And now hires are delayed because of the shutdown. But eventually, they're going to need the people to help carry that. They're going to need more rank and file people to help carry out that agenda because it's incredibly complicated. It's like picking straws off a camel's back. But if you pick the wrong straw, then you could create a bad media headline or create some damage because
Mm.
you have to like scale back this Jenga tower without knocking it over. And there are dependencies built up around certain regulations. So you have to be careful about which one you target and how. So I made a whole decision tree for the HHS to,
Oh, really?
yeah, to help plug into the AI to identify regulations that could be cut. And it goes like, does it achieve the objective that it says it's trying to achieve? Like with COVID vaccine or something, is it reducing actual deaths, or with regulations around food processing? Is it reducing salmonella? Okay, so if it fails at the task that it's trying to do, then well, that's pathetic. It's automatically out. Next,
Mm-hmm.
you compare it to the secondary effects. So is it achieving its goal, but then causing more damage in other areas? So you examine those. If it doesn't, if it's succeeding there, then you go to the next layer of test, which is this something, um, how does it impact innovation, which is future oriented changes? And then the layer beyond that is this something that can be reasonably done more locally? And if it passes all those tests, then you can keep the regulation for now.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so you have to think carefully about how to do this. And you also need, and this applies less to regulation. Regulations are easier to cut than spending. But you need alternative structures for people to rely on to be able to start cutting the government. And this relates to my point about the Roman Empire, where the change comes before the change. Because people think
Hmm.
it's like, do we get rid of empire? Do we not get rid of empire? The Roman Empire didn't dissolve until long after security was already transferred more locally. So you had locals, the Romans take over, the Roman army guarantees security, and then eventually it's locals guaranteeing security in Roman uniforms, and then the Roman Empire just doesn't exist anymore because the
Mm-hmm.
change fault happens before the change. And one of the
Mm.
things the New England states have done is they've started creating their own healthcare association because they were so mad about different stuff RFK was doing. And I hate healthcare regulation, but I'm very happy the New England states are doing that because it makes it easier to get rid of the federal bureaucracy. There's no
Mm.
reason that Florida and California have to regulate medical doctor licensing the same way. And the
Mm-hmm.
AMA and the states do have control over their licensing boards, but all the standards are set by the AMA, which is a monopoly.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and this is why Rand Paul got into politics. Besides, his dad obviously, well, he
Yeah.
was an eye doctor. He tried to create a competing eye doctor association. There's only one; it's a monopoly, and so he got shut down. So he's like, "All right, I'm going to go into politics because this and change this." Um, and that's actually a really important issue that, working with Trump, you could get accomplished through the bureaucracy without requiring Congress at all. Um, but it's an issue people don't necessarily understand. It's not that talked about. So I would just like to like increase it on the public consciousness because this is a real opportunity to save America. And I believe Trump is focused on this opportunity, but I don't not believe in messaging. I would just rather the messaging be aligned towards things that Trump actually might do that will also make a huge difference
Yeah.
versus
Yeah.
things that he's probably not going to do that also don't make a lot of difference.
Okay. What What do you think the staying power of any given Trump move is going to be, and how do, insofar as you want to secure certain victories that he
Hmm.
achieves, what is the path to keep those in place, or to stymie the flood of just like you get rid of the bit of bureaucracy and then that just kind of grows back in there? Because where are those people going to go? I mean, Yarvin was talking about
Hmm.
print a bunch of money, just send them off, just print a bunch of money and go have them go. You're not allowed around here anymore. Here's a plot of land, 40 acres, and
Yeah. Oh, that's funny. I
a
say the
mule or
same
something.
thing. I'm because we're giving these bureaucrats huge payout packages to leave. I'm like, pay
Mm-hmm.
them their life salary times four forever. And just get them to stop making rules because it's not a lot of money. You're not saving the money by firing the bureaucrats. You're saving the money by preventing the economic damage that the bureaucrats do in
Yeah,
coordination with major
yeah,
corporations.
yeah. Do you think that
Um,
that's? I mean, is that
oh,
one path forward? You know.
Yeah, so well, that's what he's doing. So the question then is like, how far can you go, and how far can you actually change the rules within these agencies after firing a large number of people? And the reason,
Mm-hmm.
so people say, well, it's not going to stick. They didn't really get rid of the Department of Education. They're just going to like reform it the next time a Democrat gets in, etc. Well, first, let's try and not get a Democrat in by sabotaging the right over secondary issues or unnecessary uh, factional infighting.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
It's so
but
fun though.
but second, what happens is if you actually get rid of bureaucracy in a way that results in a change, then it's really hard to add that bureaucracy back in. And mostly we've focused on technological accelerationism, which relates to this, because if you
Mm.
create an innovation and create a new industry around it that's not regulated yet, like a legacy industry, then you can move fast, get stuff established, and then it's hard
Mm.
to walk that back. And so with Uber,
Freaking
they went out
rent
there in the
seekers,
gray
man.
market. Yeah. And they destroyed the taxi medallion
Yeah.
monopoly. And no one could bring that back except for in partial ways in New York City and LA, like the most progressive parts of the country. There wasn't the political will to return taxi monopolies anywhere else. It's very difficult. Same thing with education. If you free education and then people start to pursue these alternate models of education and it turns out they work and there's these great results and it's cheap, then you're never going to be able to put that genie back in the bottle. But it
Mm.
was very hard for them to establish this bureaucracy in the first place because it's against Western values. And so it
Is
required
it
like,
still though? I mean, isn't that the question? I mean, when we talk about the culture war or whatever, we're
mhm.
struggling to figure out if we do still share the same values.
Well, it's not against Western values anymore. I would say like 90% of the people have fairly socialist values. But that's why you need elite politics and to also explain how deregulation doesn't actually benefit large corporations, it benefits people. A case that not
Hmm.
even leftists could argue against. I made that case on the culture war last week, and the Democrat, independent left wing guy, he voted for Romney back in the day, but he's on that side of the friend enemy distinction, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I've talked to Jimmy Dore's big supporters about it. Like regulations were sold on the premise that they protect consumers from an asymmetry of power with large corporations, when in
Mm-hmm.
reality, those monopolies create a single access point from which those large corporations can control the entire economy.
Yeah.
And you saw the left start to jump on this a little bit with Jon Stewart was referencing the chart the other day of industries where prices go up versus down, and that's because of regulation. Ezra Klein has been doing this prosperity doctrine stuff. So the left actually sensed a real vulnerability on this point, and they started doing defensive narratives on it before the election and after the election. And it's
What do you mean
like
defensive? They want to defend regulation?
no, they want to talk about cutting red tape too. Gavin Newsom
Yeah.
was saying stuff like that too. Oh yeah, I hate red tape. I don't like inefficiency. Doge was very popular, the idea of it.
Yeah.
And they're like crap. And they're not only worried about this because it's a popular political, but because it upholds all of their power. All the Fortune 500 companies voted for Kamala. There's this alliance between activists, leftists, and globalist technocrats.
Yeah.
Um, and and if the US deregulates, the entire global regulatory cartel, which we largely set up, will collapse. And this is what all politics is about, is the international standardization of tax and regulatory rates to prevent a race to the bottom, which which, as the socialists say, right, which is in
What do you mean a
reality.
race to the bottom? In which way? In what
So the
respect?
socialist concept, and this is why communism is international, because socialism doesn't
Yeah.
work,
Yeah.
and competition will undermine the people who don't. If people abandon socialism, that competition will undermine socialist systems, make them look
Yep.
bad, make them poor, etc. Not make them poor relative. And
Hmm.
so they need international standardization of tax and regulations. This works out for large corporations because then they can also become
Well,
the
they can cook the
entrenched
books in their
player.
direction. Yeah, they
Yeah,
get
they can
to.
do regulatory capture overseas as well. And it works for the corrupt domestic leaders because all they want is they're already doing the bidding of the oligarchs. They don't want to lose power. So they'd rather not take the hit from following the bidding of the oligarchs. And if other countries aren't leaving, then they don't take as much of a relative hit and they can
Yeah.
secure their domestic power without changing. For example, if the US deregulates actively, it's going to put China in a very tough spot that's going to undermine Z, right? He would prefer, and the Europeans would prefer to maintain that stability. This is like how Rudyard and I talk about how it's more like the 1600s, where there's tons of internal destabilization in all of these countries. And so they would rather work together to uphold their domestic fiefdom than fight each other. And that there's still some fighting and there's limited warfare, but the main goal is for each one to hold on to their domestic fiefdom in this globalist alliance. So,
Well, could
yeah.
could you just, since we're at that level of the conversation, could you just mention Russia? Like, what do you think Russia's play is in this? Do they want to maintain the regulatory? It seems like they're defying it.
Sort of. Russia's like really socialist still. Vladimir Putin talks about this,
Yeah,
and
but
it's
isn't
also
it?
very
It's a limited socialism, right? It's an
sort of
internal
it's a very
focus.
oligarch
Yeah.
dependent power structure. And
Yes.
so you can't be too offensive to it would be hard for Putin to shirk his own oligarchs with a free market revolution, which
Hmm.
puts him in this
They tried it
interesting
and it was a
place.
free fall. It seems like so. And so he just recreated a oligarchy kind of in his image after uh, what he inherited from Yeltsin.
Well, I
He,
wouldn't even
he
say they
reformulated.
tried it. Like that's what they did. That's what the post-Soviet structure was. They didn't even go to a free market phase. They just went right to selling
No.
off the state assets
Yeah.
to oligarchs.
From my cursory reading, and it's not really deep, it seems like the culture was so reliant on corruption in every level of the power structure that they couldn't go to a free market. Free market is dependent on high trust, I would say probably Anglo European values in order to operate at scale.
This
They
is an
just didn't have
interesting
that.
part because I think those values are very important for preventing the rise of bureaucracy around new industries. This is how I talk about Asia a lot. This is why I'm like, everybody thinks Asia's ascendant, and I'm saying you don't understand. First of all, I worked in Asia at a site selection consulting company. Is one of the things I did out there, which means we analyzed all the factors that companies use to determine whether they would relocate to a site. And people have an idea that we lost it all. The competition, the offshoring was due to cheap labor and competing with cheap labor, et cetera. That's not true at all. Labor is in the bottom 20, doesn't even make the top 20 of site selection factors. First, you need the hub
So
of
by site
expertise.
selection, you're not just talking about where in a city will we set up our little industry. It's where in the globe do we want
We're
to
in the
set up?
globe,
Yeah.
and
Okay.
that goes down to a city level. So it'll usually be something like these three cities in China, this city in Vietnam, this city in Malaysia, and then you do a comparative analysis. And labor is never a factor because, like I said before, cheap labor competes directly with high value labor. The
Hmm.
labor costs, you got 100 people in the field in India, that's competes with a tractor. Um, and labor costs on average as a percent of manufacturing revenue in China are 8%, and the US, they're 11%. And that's been fairly consistent over the last 20 years.
Hmm.
Um, And so that's
So
a
if it's not labor,
3%
what is
difference.
it?
So it's a
Yeah.
3% difference in labor costs. That is dwarfed by shipping alone. Trans-Pacific shipping is 10% of manufacturing revenue. The major, by far, difference in costs is regulations because we're doubling, tripling, quadrupling the costs of our projects, and then we're also adding on timelines where if a lot of times it's been more expensive to build in Asia, but if you can get your factory up, it's really hard to move an entire company overseas. But if you can get your factory up in 1 year instead of 5 years, then that's 4 extra years
Hmm.
of potential to capture market share that your competitors are not.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so yeah, all the main factors were the regulatory structure, and then you have certain prerequisites you need, right? You need some sort of infrastructure tie-in. You can't just set up in the middle of the Kazakhstan or something.
Yeah.
You need a
So
university hub, the skilled labor, etc. Which all these things in the U.S. we already have as prerequisites. To look for them in Asia, you have to like poke around it. Oh, maybe this city will work or that city. In the U.S.,
yeah.
you could do it in almost every city.
Yeah.
We have a huge amount of knowledge and technology and skilled labor. All the best universities are here. It's just we can't really use them.
But the we were talking about corruption and how
Hmm.
that kind of causes Russia to behave the way it does. You said something to the effect that Asia isn't going to be as ascendant as
Oh,
people
yes. So that's
fear or
because,
think because
yeah,
of
so
certain values.
China adopted basic property rights, right? They did that probably because not through some value revelation, but through empirical observation, which is the famous quote from the Chinese guy where she's like, "We don't care. I don't. We just look at what works and then we'll do that, right?" So property rights work. They adopt them, creates a whole. They really adopt them only in limited areas, special economic zones, because they can't cut in on the fiefdom of the governors. Um, and uh, and then those take off. They create a bunch of whole new industries, right? And now this is how it relates back to the tech acceleration point, because
Hmm.
obviously Asia did not have any bureaucracies around industries that didn't exist, but now they have these industries. They're forming bureaucracies around them about 20 times faster than we did. It took us 120 years, and this is because of the value structure, right? It took us 120 years of intense propaganda, a long march through the institutions to get us to the point where we have 35-40% public spending as a percent of GDP and a massive regulatory state. It took China 20 years to get to about the same level as us. They have the longest the only area in which they'll have a likely continual advantage from a political perspective is intellectual property regulation, which they themselves are also still increasing. Um,
What do you mean?
and
In what way? Increasing the decreasing of
no, they're
intellectual
starting to add
property theft,
IP.
or
They didn't
okay,
have IP as a concept, and now they're starting to add it to protect, um, like a lot
themselves.
of yes, their
Yeah.
oligarchy. Not to
Yeah.
overuse the word.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah, you're starting
uh,
to sound like Bernie Sanders. If you say it one more time, you're
Yeah, I'm
gonna.
stealing his points. I comment under Bernie Sanders thing all the time because I'm like, did you
Yeah.
know that you're the reason for the oligarchy?
Yeah.
Would
Yeah.
you maybe want to change that? And I'm worried. 'Cause I'm like, because people on the right aren't necessarily picking up this message. I hope I'm not teaching the left how to make socialism work a little longer, like Sweden, because that's the thing that Sweden did in the 90s. Like they deregulated heavily. Um,
Hmm.
and they have similar upper income level taxes to us, similar corporate taxes.
Hmm.
We might have separated a bit in the last 5 years, but it's all within a similar
Yeah, and you don't think
range.
Sweden's version of socialism is desirable?
No, not at all.
Why? Why not?
It's
It's like the poster child.
yeah, um, it's just like a dead society.
Innovation
Um,
flees,
yeah,
brain drain.
Sweden used to be the fourth richest country in the world, not per capita. Sweden actually has a large free market history. Um, it
Used
was
to
one
be
of the
like, when are we talking about? Like 1752,
1800s,
1939,
and then
1800s? Okay.
I think it got um, it probably peaked a little bit after World War II, and then they had a big socialist period in the 70s and 60s, and since then they've created
Do you
no
know
new
what sparked
companies.
that?
All their major companies are legacy companies,
Hmm.
socialists, probably.
Yeah. I mean,
Um,
like what attitude would have changed?
well, okay, so this is an interesting thing, right? If you look at, well, if we want to talk about the cultural and ethnic demographics of Scandinavia. Um, the Danelaw influenced regions of England, with Danelaw being the Viking law, they are the most labor heavy regions, but also the top UKIP or Reform County. So it's just like Irish and Scottish and Appalachian. They can go socialist populist or they can go capitalist populist. They can go either way, even though they're like individual rights oriented or
Yeah.
not individualistic, right? That's the more
Okay.
correct way to put it.
What
Anti-authority,
do you
yeah.
mean by populist? Not to derail you. I just, that word is a
Yeah.
slippery word.
Um, well, I guess maybe just in describing reform and labor, right? Those would be the more
Okay.
uh
The
change.
will of the
Like there's
people, the
like
common good is highlighted.
the system needs to change. The
Yeah.
system is authoritarian, they're individualistic, but the change can be bad or good. So like that's also the warning that I gave to Trump was like if we don't incorporate elements of positive solution oriented populism, then we're going to get some real nasty non-solution oriented stuff.
Okay.
It's more driven by resentment and anger.
Because in certain demographics and at certain periods of history, the collective will goes in this populist direction and can be channeled or will demand some sort of feedback from the rulership that can generally go towards a more free market or towards a more
Well, yeah,
centralized market. Is that what you're kind of?
yeah, and even not in those terms, it's just simply as if we don't fix things, we're going to get more Mondanis, right?
Okay.
Which is why we need this balance of you have all the boomer GOPism, which is a dead wall, right? So we need to fix that.
Yeah.
Um, but we also need to work within elite and current power structures.
Yes. Yeah.
And
And then
yeah,
swap them out like Indiana Jones with a bag of sand and then the
yeah, but
golden
hopefully
idol. Yeah.
the other direction.
Yeah, yeah, right. Gain the value, leave the baloney. Could you I'm sorry, we're just describing terms, but all of these terms are very salient to the broader political conversations that I've been
Mhm.
milling about within. What do you mean by boomerism? GOP
Uh,
boomerism? Like what is the
yeah,
what
so
are the what's the value structure there in the historical mythological
this relates
tell?
to the 90, remember when I said like 90% of the country is basically socialist? And this is how I see the term woke right is what I'm really concerned about on the right is socialism. Like I don't think necessarily people hate Jews or I don't care if they do hate Jews or don't like Jews. It's more that I just don't want victim consciousness and I don't want us to not solve the problem. Um and
To
it
focus on
like
petty grievances and petty vengeances rather than
and
getting our
if
shit
you
together.
and if you construct a narrative that Israel or the Jews are responsible for all our economic problems, and then we fail to fix things, and that narrative is already in place, then that's when anger and retribution comes
Yeah.
out. But like, I'm not worried about it from the perspective of the Jews because there's a lot of other problems that will happen also if Western civilization collapses. I'm
Hmm.
worried about Western civilization collapses, and
Yeah.
I'll include all the negative consequences of that as part of it, but and so that's why I'm concerned about socialism because that's what could lead to Western civilization collapsing. So I want the counterculture to be very anti-socialist, and what I'm really worried about is pro-state, pro-socialist attitudes on the new right. I know all the normies and I know all the boomer right have like baked in a lot of um, socialism, and they're getting better at it, and we can
And
work with them
how?
on that end.
Oh,
Well, not
getting better
everybody,
at
but
recognizing it.
yeah, in the general right, like for example, they elected Trump, right? And the GOP establishment is very entrenched on a state level, and we're talking about the only the GOP voters voting in those primaries, and I would say the state level politicians that make up Congress and everything are probably about 10 years behind um, the collective will, so to speak, that put Trump in, just because they're protected by an extra layer of state level politics
Hmm.
um, that Trump was able to surpass nationally, that you haven't had a figure do that in every little GOP hub, right?
Hmm.
Um,
And so there's a strain of socialism that's right-ish that
mhm.
you're describing by GOP boomerism, which is a reliance or perhaps over reliance on institutions that are at this point doing more harm than good.
Well, it's like we talked about regulations, right? Pretty much nobody really knows how this works. Nobody really talks about it. Doesn't matter if you're on the right or the left. Um, these are it's and we're at the tail end of 100 plus years of progressive dominance. So I talk about it like Tolkien. Only a fish out of water has an inkling of water.
Mm-hmm.
And even if you've come out of that water, you might still have water on your clothes. Um, and that's okay. But like, let's just be aware of it. So that's how I think of the term woke right is, and it can be economics, it can be a lot of other things, but it's basically like we live in this water. It's nobody likes to be called a communist, and that's good. I'm glad people don't like to be called communists. Um, we should use that to beat communism, and it's nothing personal to examine some of these potential frameworks that you've adopted from the culture that may be actually a part of this progressive soup, so to speak.
So when you are using the word progressive, you're talking about Dewey Wilson, like you're talking about the systematic centralization of bureaucratic
Yeah,
power
I'm
in the
talking
United
about
States, not
Wilson,
just
Hitler,
wokeness.
FDR,
Wokeness,
Stalin.
wokeness fits right into it, like
Hmm.
modern wokeness with all of these the racial grievances, all these various different
Hmm.
grievances fit into that bureaucratic thing because it bureaucratizes the human experience and politicizes the human experience. But you're talking about like something even deeper in the way that we conceive of what the role of government is in our day-to-day lives and in
Yeah,
our, in our
so
collective will.
I don't, it doesn't make me exactly feel great when I see Nick Fuentes basically quoting Mussolini about um, the private interests being subordinate to the state, everything being subordinate to the state. And that gets into some tricky
Hmm.
semantics when you factor in and then dependencies, which is where I have the problem with libertarians because they're talking about, yeah, get rid of the whole thing. I'm like, well, actually, we're kind of dependent on the Fed, which is a way to like off-write half of our taxes onto global dollar holders. We're dependent on government spending or on Social Security. Okay, that doesn't mean that I want to like subordinate private interest to the state as a philosophical end goal. I'm worried about getting the philosophical end goal correct, and then also getting people who are able to be pragmatic within
On
that
achieving those
goal
goals. Yeah.
to do our own, march through the institutions, so to speak, but
So
actually be successful about it.
So how does what is this end goal, and then how are various different factions among the right? Um, how do they differ from you, and how do you get them to get closer to your goal? What
Yeah.
is the aim?
Well, I would love to talk to you about this and help. And I think you could help me work out some of the semantics of it. Because I basically my end goal is voluntary society to the degree that it's possible. Whether it's all we know is the closer you get to
Mm.
property rights, the better. The closer to socialism, the worse. Whether it's a totalizing dynamic or a maximizing dynamic. I don't really care. That's theoretical and a long way in the future. I just want that to be a relative North Star. And the way I conceive it is you have this political trichotomy of Hobbes, Locke, and Rousseau. And um, Rousseau is obviously uh, wrong. And I think Locke
That
is,
man in a state of nature is perfect, and only through society is he corrupted.
yeah,
And
yeah.
so
And
it's a blank
communism,
slatist and very
hmm,
central education based reformation of the new man,
right.
ironically.
That could work. And then the Lockean, right? And I'm not trying to defend pure rationality or anything just by saying Locke, but he and Locke was deeply Christian, so there's a lot of straw men around that. But say Locke represents simply the American departure from monarchy, right? And then Hobbes is like, no,
Wait,
you,
wait. Focus on the Locke thing just for a moment. So
mhm,
it's
yeah,
meritocratic. It's not. There's no divine right. It's people voluntarily choose who leads them and to what degree. So there's a feedback loop, a more direct feedback loop between the servant and the authority figure, or the dismantling of authority and making
I
it all.
mainly mean that he likes property rights and believes in self-governance. So there's a lot of ways that you can take that
Mm-hmm.
because I mean you can imply it to mean democracy, but I don't I mean I spin democracy semantically the other way, as in the true definition of democracy is self-representation, which is not being able to vote on an official within a captured system, but be able to actually vote on your own representation and be able to vote for your government, which is why the king of Liechtenstein, who was an ANCAP, he offered for everybody to secede down to the individual level. The
Okay.
population actually refused, and they had a compromise around like the county level,
Okay.
which is hilarious. Um,
But
eh,
they're very small society, and they're rather homogenous in the ethnic.
well, yeah, but they're a great example of like why Bismarck was wrong. So you could say, I mean, there was a lot of pressures for them to nationalize with regard to Napoleon and everything. But the Liechtenstein was the only German kingdom that did not join the Federation. And Germany has had four systems collapses since then. Liechtenstein has had zero. And common law largely originated out of that decentralized German landscape, among other
Hmm.
places. So that, I mean, there's some complicated topics there. Eh, but then, so the way I think about Hobbes relative to that is it's like no order. Uh, I view him as like he's attached to a lot of the pro-monarchy side, right? And even Yarvin is like a Tory, explicitly a Tory. Um, and so I would say that like the Hobbesians were not validated by the eventual failure of the American system, which the founders themselves predicted would fail, et cetera. But the
Hmm.
Hobbesians, but the Hobbes said that like when you don't have this order through a
Through
I don't know
strength.
what to say totalitarian state or total ruler or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
then things go into chaos. And I relate that to government dependencies, meaning like Hobbes is correct in the sense that if you just got rid of the entire English government, it would result in chaos, right? Hobbes is correct in the sense where libertarians say, oh, I want to push the red button and get rid of everything. Okay, well, that's why you're no different than a communist because it's going to end up in exactly the same place.
Hmm.
You're not going to unless you transition the dependencies to another area like Rome, then you're not going to be able to solve the problem by pressing the red button, and things will go into chaos. However, I believe that voluntary hierarchy is superior in its function, its adaptability, its morality, but you have to foster it. So I
Hmm.
don't want to be negligent of the part of Hobbes' warning that's correct, but I still do believe that um, more voluntary forms of hierarchy are possible. And I think the American system still validates that to a huge degree, which is even why King George, the monarchist, in one of his letters was writing about how we have to stop America because the propaganda in England is like self-government that's a theoretical blah blah. It's silly. It's not going to work. It's stupid, you know. But then the
Mm.
king in his private letters is like, shit, this is going to work. God, this is going to work. If we let them do this, we're screwed. It's going to undermine our power and our institutions.
Well,
Um, and so
but
you think,
that's
oh well,
very
mhm.
contingent on the people that have already fostered enough self-reliance to be able to participate in a system that scales up to a certain degree, right?
Well, okay, so you're talking about frontier versus entrenched areas, like do we have to go to Mars to get freedom again, etc. And then that's when I would point to the 1600s in England, where there's certain differences that are afforded by having a real frontier, but they absolutely completely changed their society when the Dutch abolished their guild system, and that triggered the Industrial Revolution. They all did this all within a very entrenched old structure. I
Mm.
mean, so did China to a degree.
Hmm.
Of course, they still have a less of a value advantage than 1600s Europe. Um,
This sounds like really reliant on economics. The economic factor is what how we gauge whether the system is successful or not.
well, it's interesting because I think economics are the implication of a deeper value system. It's more of a like materialist and understandable layer,
Mm. Yeah.
but economics is very important towards our ability to perceive, uh, seek out the things that we value, whether or not those are profit oriented or not.
Hmm.
Like you can't build the Duomo without having a surplus of capital. And
Hmm.
I saw people counter like, oh, well, the shareholders, good luck selling the Duomo at a shareholders meeting. No one's asking publicly traded companies to build churches. We're talking about like a surplus of capital that it makes it easier to make that decision relative to other decisions.
Hmm.
Um, and also you need a lack of building codes to build the Duomo because that would be
Hmm.
completely illegal today
Hmm.
to try that project. Um,
There's a moral
yeah.
substrate at the base of your argument or your aim.
Hmm.
Like we said towards the beginning of our conversation about what are the values of America right now?
Hmm.
Are they more socialist? And what
Yeah.
and to what degree and why are they socialist? And how do we get over that or perceive another type of being? How do we perceive of a different type of American system that still has
Hmm.
the relative leverage among or over a large part of the world?
We do need the return to faith, and I'm more because that is what these values are based in and what they draw out of. But I'm
Mm-hmm.
also tolerant of the deist Jordan Peterson variety, where you're like analyzing the lessons from it without
Mm-hmm.
totally understanding the connection to faith, because um, that at least you're getting online with the values and creating a pathway that's going to lead to further integration versus someone who says they're a Christian but doesn't actually uphold the values that I presume
Mm-hmm.
to be associated with it. Um, I'd say that's fake Christian is worse than deist, which is worse than real Christian. And I know a lot of
Hmm.
people are fake Christians right now because it's trendy. Like I literally personally know large accounts that are pagan that are LARPing as Christians.
Hmm.
So this is something that's important to be aware of. There's a ton of potential for abuse of the Lord's name, so to
I
speak.
mean, the founder of Christianity, that Jesus guy,
Yeah,
he said a few things about false prophets.
yeah.
Uh, they're just inevitable. And
Mm.
that's a level of discernment. How do you tell the difference, or how do you foster what you call real Christianity at scale in your generation, let's say?
Um, I, basically, if I had to boil it down to Um, it would be uh, truth, like logos. It would be sovereignty, um, like man in the image of God, and then it would
Mm.
be love, neighbor, treat your neighbor like yourself, etc. Those are good kind of distillations, but obviously the Bible is very complicated and how
What are you talking about?
and, like you can see it's I mean w- yeah, you can try and boil it down to the point that it's insufficient, or you can open it up to the point that it's not fully digestible. I just know that
Yeah.
there there's some people that are right and there's some people that are wrong,
Yeah.
and I
Some people
associate a
good,
lot
some
with
people
this
bad.
yeah, with the death of God, right, in the West and the
Yeah.
rise
Hmm.
that's directly correlated with the rise of progressivism, and so I
Hmm.
see the restoration of God as important, but
Hmm.
that's we should be honest about how hard of a task that's going to be.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. To kill the god of the progressive state is no less in the short term destructive and dangerous as the death of God, the Christian God, over the course
mhm.
of however many centuries that played out in Europe. To kill the progressive God that came into the place of the Christian God is not. It's not a laughing matter. Could you expand on love? How do you market love? Because it seems like in the current political environment, ironically and hypocritically, but aesthetically, the left, the socialist, has got a market on love, on certain aspects of Christian doctrine of love, of
Hmm.
treating people equally. No human is illegal. The deploring of ethnocentrism, of any sort
Hmm.
of chauvinism. Uh, but you see this groundswell of masculine desire or male desire for
Hmm.
political action and political identity. And without love, that's going to go off the rails. But
Yeah.
how do you market love? How does that being manifested do you
Well,
see for your
yeah, yeah.
generation
So
and people of your ilk?
this reminds me of another good point, right? Because it can be sensitive. I'm talking about who's a fake Christian or not on the right, like who's the decider. I'm not trying to decide. I'm just warning. And like a clear example of how fake Christianity is possible is look at the entire left, right? There's a lot of left-wing churches that have inverted Christianity, which is what Marxism is, in my opinion. It's the shadow of Christianity. Um,
It's
the
the
greater the
materials,
light,
satanic, let's
the
say. Yeah.
greater the shadow. And so it's not a
Hmm.
subversion of Christianity that's external. It's a pattern that occurs often within Christianity as a mirror of its principles, which is why
Hmm.
like people associate early Christianity with Antifa a lot because Christianity was taken up by a slave population. So it had a lot of potential to demonstrate the inverted side of it. Um,
Hmm. Hmm.
but so with love, like, well, this is a great one for caring about poor people and caring about the healthcare crisis in a way that actually addresses it and fixes it in a way that's aligned with Western Christian values, according to my interpretation.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
so that's a great solution. I mean, but that's like a political lens. Like, how do you? I mean, maybe people should ask themselves that question. Like, I think black pill is a killer of love. Um,
Hmm.
uh, you need to have to be able to take a leap of faith that things will work out. Otherwise, they're never going to work out. And if they do,
You'll be dominated by anxiety and then
well, you're
resentment.
not positioning yourself for success. There's tons of examples in life where you don't know exactly if you're going to beat this guy to the finish line in a race, but you don't look around, you keep your head down and you keep running anyways to do the most you can in case that it was fast enough, right?
Hmm.
Um, and and also even if things do go bad, you're still going to be in a better position if you try and set yourself up for a good future than give up because you have this black pill view. Like no matter
Hmm.
the outcome, giving up uh, is never going to position you better, even if there's going to be some frustrations or injustice
Hmm.
with it.
What is if Satan wanted to tempt you with a black pill, what would you be
Mm.
most susceptible to
I'm
ingesting?
temptable by Satan. I took DMT in college, and I was just kind of like, this is kind of joking, but I did it in a place where we wanted to do it for a while, but we were about to graduate, so like it wasn't the greatest time to do psychedelics because you're in a mental state
Higher
where you're trying to
pressed, yeah,
end chaos, right?
pressure.
And so, but we had it, so I did it anyways. But I very much fought the experience because I wanted to do it, but I didn't want to leave myself vulnerable to demons at that moment. And so I just
Hmm.
saw, the kaleidoscope of octagons and hexagonal shapes, mostly purple based, and this mosaic theme, and nothing popped up. Nothing was. I was just like, it felt like fighting the ocean, right? You're fighting nature, but fighting DMT is not easy. But I didn't not
Hmm.
have fun doing it. It was kind of like a fun fight. And I feel like I got to this point where I stabilized myself and like I won the fight. And then that's when these three kind of kabuki mask looking faces showed up, and they were made also of geometric shapes. And they at first tried to charm me, um, like with a smile, and then the smile grew, and I was like, no, not interested. Yeah, thank you, but no. No, nah. And then the smile got bigger and bigger until it turned into like a demonic, like a grin. It was at its apex of charm before it turned into a scream, and then they poof disappeared.
Hmm.
Um, and so I've always held on to my values really strongly, and found a way to actually integrate them in a way that's like responsible and pragmatic and realistic. And I feel what happens to a lot of people is they hold on to their values so strongly that it breaks them. And then this is goes to the post liberal pipeline because they're not like if you think you have to press the red button, right? If you have to convince people that taxation um, is theft, so that means they're a bad person for not being for eliminating all taxes. Well, then you force them to rationalize your ideals as bad for their own survival. So it's
Hmm.
like, well, and maybe that's not your ideals that you're talking about. Like, why are you confusing the North Star with trying to make them commit suicide right now by ignoring real constraints?
Hmm.
Um,
And concerns, yeah.
yeah, and it's hard for people to integrate that because they create a false dichotomy around principles and action, and then other people kind of get this like wimpy middle ground between principles and action where they think, okay, if you're synthesizing a false dichotomy, that's not helping either. And so that's why I frame it as no, I'm 100% idealistic and 100% pragmatist. I'm not a middle ground. I'm 100% both. Um, and
Hmm.
so that enables you to be ruthlessly effective towards your valued ends. And
Hmm.
we need to have that attitude and also pick good valued ends.
Hmm. And what are those ends? So the replacing of these dependencies from the state to somewhere else in the hopes of getting the dependency to be situated closer and closer to the individual so that people are taking care of themselves and not relying on the government taking care of them.
Yeah, I mean, that's a huge part of what keeps us dependent on psychopathy, I guess you could say.
Huh.
Um,
Yeah. And
that's how
is
I frame it
there,
to left
yeah.
wing people. Like, of course, I want that as an end goal. Why would I want to be dependent on these psychopaths? But yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. Yeah. So, so faith is a component of how the West will be saved.
Yes.
Is that faith possible in a post-liberal world, in a post-Christian world, actually, in a world where many faiths are propagating, faiths that aren't just Christian, like America was founded with the respect for variance within the Christian denomination, or like the broadly speaking, the Catholic nature of certain Christian presuppositions.
Hmm.
That's how people were kind of equalized. And allowed to operate in conjunction and not like fight with each other. The right seems to have
Hmm.
that problem. Um, But if you have a lot of atheism, a lot of the Muslim population kind of taking
Hmm.
residence and taking over certain
Yes.
principalities, like how is that going to work out? I know Christian nationalism is a bad word, but it seems like we can't have a Christian nation without Christianity. We can't have a nation
Hmm.
of the character of America without it being Christian in some
Yeah.
fundamental sense.
Well, look at Vivek Ramaswamy is a great example of this, because he's kind of along the deist philosophical lines, even though he relates it as a value structure through his Hinduism.
Mm-hmm.
And I've had these conversations with people all over the world. I spent 2 weeks hanging out with an Indonesian guy that was part of the sales team, who's a Muslim. And I basically, there's okay, this is another false dichotomy, right? Because people argue universal values are no universal values. The
Mm-hmm.
reality is there are differences with universal through lines, and there's an ability to relate your values through other people's semantic framing. And that's what Vivek is doing with deism and Hinduism. And he's latching onto the parts of Hinduism that are associated with monotheism. Because if you go to India, they'll all try and take credit for monotheism, even though there's a lot of, you know, just there's partial truth and also serious lack of truth to that. But whatever, I don't care. People find a way to translate it. Like when you take Christianity to Japan, right, in the 1600s, 1800s, people translate it through their own cultural context. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so there's ways to build up to that. I think uh, Jordan Peterson's biblical series probably turned more people Christian than anyone else, even if he didn't go to that full point himself, which I don't know exactly what his personal
Mm-hmm.
situation is. I appreciate his carefulness, and if he's legitimately having a struggle with faith, then I really appreciate him being honest about that, because I think he's actually much closer to Christian ideals than a lot of people who will
Mm-hmm.
loudly proclaim their faith for marketing reasons, which is
Mm-hmm.
the fact that you take God seriously enough to not do that, to me is a good sign. Um,
So
yeah.
even when some poster on Twitter refuses to curse Vishnu, that's still better than them not believing in anything.
Sorry, say that again. If you refuse versus
There's this
church.
Vishnu. There's this
Mhm.
shit test for different. There's a lot of posters on X that traffic in right wing ideas
Hmm.
and seem to talk about and for American values. And there's this test that people that are more or less authentically American do to
Mm.
these accounts
Oh, do you
saying,
praise Vishnu?
do you know, curse Vishnu like
Oh,
that?
okay,
That's
yeah, yeah.
like
To prove
this
it, yeah,
test.
yeah. Denounce
But
God, Paul, but Vishnu, yeah.
yeah, but Vishnu. And so I'm riffing on that you're saying that if somebody refuses to do that, that still says
Hmm.
that they're oriented towards the transcendent in a way that's better than them not being oriented towards the transcendent, even if that
Not,
transcendent doesn't necessarily
not
align with the
necessarily.
Christian God.
Uh, I wouldn't say they have to couch it through their Hinduism to be more Christian. Just that, like, there's ways to slowly integrate these values within a cultural frame
Mm-hmm.
that's more familiar. So it's like you want to make it your idea, right? To
Hmm.
like let people think it's their idea to be able to adopt it, and then you start adopting the ideas, and then you eventually just get to Christianity, just like
Okay.
the missionaries did in Japan.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
and yeah, I mean, I don't think black pills help things go in a more, like we've talked about that related to love. So I don't
Mm-hmm.
want to pretend like materialistic policy is everything. This is another false dichotomy, right? We talk about some people are very concerned with policy, some people are very concerned with self-responsibility or bottom-up value change. And
Mm-hmm.
you need both, because if you make it so that you're actually able to learn skills and apply them and afford a family and afford life and afford to not move away from your town, then it makes it easier for you to um, recover all these other cultural institutions and
Hmm. Hmm.
frameworks of stability.
These lost technologies. Why do you think monotheism is important for the character of the West?
Um, well, I think it's a key component of Christianity that ties into the individual framework. Um, but yeah, I'm not
So
sure
there's
I
something
can. Yeah.
fundamental about an individual's relationship to the one Almighty God that
Hmm.
allows for these different levels of social activity or unification, harmony, let's say.
Maybe. I think that's probably making a more sophisticated point, possibly a better point than I'm making. I just know that, I mean, it depends what type of I immediately went to like, what type of polytheism are you talking about? What gods?
Hmm.
But it's a pretty clear category difference just on multiple levels, in that even you're connecting to a value structure rather than gods that are representing different psychological, emotional states. And so
Hmm.
when you get angry, it's Jupiter. It's just a totally different thing almost.
Hmm. 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 Do you think that it's fundamental that America recover its faith before it goes further, or I guess
This
revise
goes
its
back to the
faith?
false dichotomy. It's both. One helps the other.
Okay.
Institutional change helps recover
Okay.
faith, freeing us from this godless Marxist propaganda control.
Mm.
Uh,
Hmm.
and faith helps us free ourselves from that and also make the most of it uh,
Hmm.
or not take it in a different direction without abandoning some of the negative Marxist core assumptions about, say, the state being supreme or something like that.
Hmm. Hmm. Who are your enemies on the right, and how? What's your plan on converting them to
My main
friends?
problem with the right, and I don't want to say enemies because I'm frustrated with a ton of people, including my own political network. And I don't want it to be taken personally. Like if I'm
Hmm.
identifying something I think is being connected to Marxism that you're saying, it's like the water out of the lake thing, or it's like in the
Mm.
beginning of Cobra Kai, Johnny Carson's character, he's working as a handyman at this woman's house, and she keeps telling him to move the TV to different walls, and eventually he's like, stop being a bitch, you know? And then she gets him fired, and his boss is like, I heard you said she was a bitch. And he's like, I didn't say she was a bitch. I just
Yeah.
said she was being a bitch. Okay. I'm not trying to define you and box you. It's just like, I'm just saying that you're acting a little bit like a communist, which is
Yeah.
okay. We're pretty much all communists. You know, everybody's a little woke sometimes. And the woke label even failed with the left, where like independence got it always felt like an attack and a straw man. And like you're right. So I even when woke
Mm.
was used against the left, I would say it sometimes, I would not say it other. I would use it rhetorically sometimes, and then I would like clarify that I meant progressive or something.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so it's never like the same reaction that people are having to it on the right was a lot of the same reaction to the left, and it's a very different circumstance. But get back to your enemies question. I have like a question for certain people pursuing a certain political strategy, right? Because all the tough guys on the right agree that the right is the only game in town, right? Okay, well, how then is once you've identified that, then why is your plan to shit on Trump and to make Israel the most important thing in your coalition? Because one, Trump has 90% approval rating within the GOP. Two, almost like the vast bulk of support for Israel exists within the GOP. And I'm not saying you have to support funding Israel. Like even Netanyahu's agreed to like eliminate for like nobody's even fighting for that anymore. It's not even a lot of money. Right? We can try and tie it
Hmm.
semantically to the Middle East wars and then get some trillions out of there. This is
Hmm.
not. this is not actually the reason Gen Z doesn't have houses, especially going forward as a future threat.
Yeah.
Um, and
Hmm.
so, okay, so the right's the only game in town. We're real tough, but we want to focus on those issues, which makes it literally impossible to unite the right. Like I consider the Israel issue like I did the weed issue as a libertarian. A lot of
Hmm.
libertarians care a lot about that, or say like Palestine. Do we care about Palestine and people in jail from weed, right? Like, okay, sure, big deal. Or the legacy of Abraham Lincoln, right? Those are all issues that will completely split the right. Weed, Israel, is Abraham Lincoln good or bad? I don't feel the need to fully adjudicate those right now. I want to
Hmm.
beat the international communist regulatory cartel that is keeping us trapped in oligarchy, as Bernie would say, and free the school system. Like that's actually really important, guys. Okay, that's like a
Yeah.
foundational plank of the Communist Manifesto, and a lot. And you can basically take any issue and say, unless we fix this issue, we're not going to be free. And like these people say, unless we roll back the empire, then we can never be free because empire requires abuse of certain domestic things. So unless we free the education system, we're never going to be free because the next generation is going to be brainwashed. Okay, every industry has a
Hmm.
rationale for why their industry is the most important. Okay, I've seen them
Yeah.
all, every different one explain it. Um, and there are some actually really important things that we can get done that you could easily argue are very much more important than the things we're putting swords on bridges over.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so it's like what that seems like very strategically stupid to me. And also I consider myself like a counter-fed. I imagine whatever the leftist deep state wants to push on, like I want to push on the opposite of that. So they want
Hmm.
to push on Israel, they want to push on this. I have the instinct to push on the opposite. So I operate kind of like a counter-fed. Um,
Hmm.
and uh yeah, like how does and then people talk about, oh no, we're going to be controlled by Zionism. They say Zionism is an equal threat to communism or something. Um, but they're talking about like Israel and whatever it does around the Middle East relative to a global system of communism and ideological capture. Like Israel's main influence on the US in recent times was getting Trump elected. Not getting him elected, but helping him. They helped. They're not aligned with the European deep state. The Adelsons gave him some money. Like, what's the real effect of the Adelsons giving him money? It wasn't war in Iran. It was beating
Hmm.
Kamala. That was the primary impact of that. So I'm like, not
Hmm.
that worried about it. And we can
Hmm.
talk about Iran and all that stuff. And I think Trump had an absolute masterpiece there because he took out the nuclear excuse, which was there's plenty of other ways to cause threats. You can overwhelm people with rockets. 5 years of Chinese drone strikes can change of drone development and supply can change the entire missile dynamic.
Hmm.
You can rebuild the nuclear program, but the nuclear was the single narrative excuse used for the war with Iran. So Trump bombs it, possibly just taking a chunk out of a mountain. Nobody can counter signal it. They've lost their entire war narrative. Trump tells the biggest ever Israeli bomber fleet to turn around midair when they're about to blow up all of Tehran's key and civilian infrastructure. Um, and he prevented a war in Iran. So I thought that was a master stroke. I think the
Hmm.
giving giving Palace I love the creativity of their approach around Israel because everybody was like, "Oh, we need to restore 67 borders or will never be peace, or we need to give them an own state or there'll never be peace in the Middle East because everyone's mad about what Israel's doing." And so it's like, is it going to be Israel or Palestine, Israel or Palestine? And they're like, what about the third option of giving it to rich regional Arabs so that they're actually invested in its development? Um, and that's basically what happened. And Hamas is completely screwed because they're like at week 2 of the Bundy cabin standoff, where it's like it's clear that this is not going the way the cattle standoff went where they were successful. This is only ending one way. So you like, and they're getting half the so half the countries that fought Israel in the 67 war were U.S. Are now U.S. allies, and the other half are telling Hamas to surrender. Right. So I mean, there's they lost the dynamic that gave them the power, and Trump offering it as a third option to get rich regional Arab interests on board
Hmm.
changed the equation. So that's great, and that's going to make that issue fade. Because Hamas is just going to get slowly, continually squeezed out to the point where they're no more than a drug cartel. Uh, so that's over. People
Hmm.
don't really believe it's over yet, but it is. And so that's also going to change the news cycle, and I think leave some of the people who've staked their hat on this issue a little bit in the dust, which I'm I'm really happy to move past it because it's one of those three main factional, it's a unnecessary, non-existential factional wedge. And Trump is the one who beat the neocons. He he's not going to bring every troop home right away,
Yeah.
but like he's not going to press the red button, but he's very specifically shifting to from a strategy of passing off security obligations to regional allies in a way that
Yeah.
enables us to pull out of regions,
Yeah.
which is exactly in line with the North Star value and being conscious of dependencies.
Hmm.
Because for even with Japan, right? Like we created an arms race with China and then completely guaranteed their security. So if we just pull out of Japan, after starting an arm race with China, you could see how they'd be a little miffed, or it would create these unnatural balances in the world. So we'd have to be very
Hmm.
careful about how we remove these dependencies, but we definitely have to remove them. So I'm 100% anti-empire and 100% pragmatist.
Hmm. Hmm. So in middle of last century, there was this guy FDR,
Hmm.
Franklin Roosevelt,
Hmm.
and he inherited. I guess he came to power during the Great Depression, and then he was in power for longer than most presidents by going through the Second World War, and then he established the American system of world dominance and internal dominance by setting
Hmm.
up the New Deal and all these agencies.
Yeah.
And we're living through the slow collapse of that system that he established. And he made sure that it wouldn't have a leader that would inherit the reins of power that he held by
Mm.
putting it all in all these different, like
It
Horcruxes.
went to
He
the
hit all
auto
the
pen or whatever.
yeah, yeah. Basically, he put all the little shards of power into
Mm.
all these agencies, which have now led us to this total bureaucratic stranglehold
Hmm.
on the state of America and the world.
Yeah.
Do you see that Trump is forward thinking enough to establish a line of succession? Because that seems like 4 years is
Hmm.
not enough to affect lasting change. And it seems like now would be the time to start implementing that, or at least talking about it, thinking about it. Do you have any ideas or insights into the
Well,
future?
everybody seems to talking about it through the lens of JD Vance, right? Trump
Yeah.
1 term, JD Vance 2 terms. I mean, I don't want to get cocky about coronations, because if you say the outcome
Hmm.
so early, there's a lot of factors you have to get right. I think the biggest variable is how much Trump gets done, right? Because say he ends the Ukraine war, it becomes apparent to people that there's not going to be another Middle East war or World War III starting out of the Middle East. He, you start to see the economic results of deregulation, or you
Mm.
go further towards that route and start to get some uh, growth numbers beyond AI associated growth.
Okay. Yeah.
You start to like make meaningful impacts in people's lives, and we can be in a whole nother situation in 3 years. And this is what I think a lot of the right is underestimating because they don't understand the impact that regulations have. And because most of the news is doomerism, they don't
Hmm.
understand how successful Trump's already been. Remember,
Yeah.
I said even the left can make it look like socialism works if they focus on deregulation.
Hmm.
Like if the Democrats can do it in Sweden, then even without a complete revolution, Trump can have a ton of success, and he's likely to have success. Um, and he's very popular within the GOP. So, think about a couple of these factors changing. You start to see the results of the Department of Education. The Ukraine war ends. That totally changes people's midterms calculation. That changes the calculation for the
Yep.
future. Um, Once people start to realize what Trump's doing more,
Yeah.
uh, so that's how successful Trump is the biggest factor to me. So I'm focused on like I want to help Trump be as successful as possible.
Hmm.
And then after that, it would be definitely great to have a continuation of someone who understands the relevance of bureaucracy because then you're locking it in long enough for some of these alternate structures to grow, which
Yeah.
is means one, you're going to have tremendous electoral success, which can keep these ideas going. And uh, two, it's going to be too hard to put the genie back in the bottle if you get
Yeah.
that runway.
Yeah.
And I think the
Um,
right has earned itself about three cycles just based on, I mean,
what's
the
happened so far?
collapse of 100-year progressive momentum, right? We're at a Thucydides trap moment.
Hmm.
So the only thing in my mind that can mess it up is Trump not going far enough and the right just completely fracturing and going crazy and validating the straw man of the left by
Yeah. Yeah.
overemphasizing talking about Hitler or whatever. Like
Yeah.
because the left was very quiet, right? But they're collecting clips and the thread of
Yeah.
associations to these clips is very, very shallow and robust.
Hmm.
It's not far away. And so they're going to be able to convince normies fairly effectively that their straw man of what Trump was is
Yeah.
true, or at
Yeah.
least where the GOP is going, and it
Interesting.
creates a really difficult problem that it's like funny to watch Tucker Carlson kind of navigate it with uh, Nick Fuentes because he's like I don't like how Tucker has overly adopted some of this Israel is responsible for US foreign policy framing because we're an empire with our own motives. We identified the seven countries on Wesley Clark's list. He specifically said he recognized those as former Soviet client states, which the US planned to target immediately after the fall of the Soviet Union because it opened up the Middle East, which was identified as the highest value area. People don't understand how developed the Middle East was even 30 years ago. It's had a lot of wars that compromised that, but also at the center of global trade and with as a key energy player. Like, Europe still doesn't have a pipeline, external continental pipeline outside of Russia. We had the World Cup in Qatar because we discovered a few years earlier that they share 60% of Iran's natural gas basin, like one of the biggest supplies of natural gas in the world.
Hmm.
And so they want a pipeline from Qatar through Iraq, Israel, Greece into Europe. And even something like that gets framed as being solely like a product of Israeli motivation or something. When we're talking about their small markup on the way through versus Europe cutting their gas prices in half so they don't have to ship liquefied natural gas on tankers. Like
Hmm.
there's other players involved in this.
Yeah.
And the Israeli government was against the Iraq war when it started. The only reason Netanyahu got back in power as the eventual longest serving leader of Israel is because he was the US stooge when most of the Israeli government was against it. He's like, I'll be the cheerleader, right? And then they have to get on board with good relations. And who do you want leading your country? The guy that has the relationships with the empire starting wars in your backyard or not? It's like
Hmm.
it's a very obvious like it's the opposite. It's like he used American connections to control Israel, rather for us to keep us aligned towards those ends. And he almost too well, right? He was almost too good of a partner because he continued that agenda even after we beat our own neocons. But it's fine because it's our choice to make. It's Trump's choices to make. That's why I was never worried about war with Iran I talked to Trump about war. He's very adamant he stopped World War III. Very clearly doesn't want
Hmm.
to be he was against the Iraq war when it was happening. Okay.
Hmm.
I don't know why people were worried about him doing that. And I never thought that Israel would be able to tell him what to do. So yeah, I mean, anyway, getting back to that. So Tucker adopts that framing, right? And it's kind of like a framing to make him cool with the radical people. But the Israel controls the U.S. government just doesn't hold up, and at least it's not as something that's even theoretically possible unless you incorporate international Jewry. Then you've got something that ties into these massive global financial systems and control over resources that you can at least theoretically tie it to a global and
Cabal.
larger incentive banks, right? Banks, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, um, so you can do that, but you're just going to get outflanked by Fuentes. Uh, you're going to get outflanked by him, and then he can
Mm.
even flank inside better by pretending to be moderate. But uh,
Hmm.
it's like you have to actually address some of these narratives. Um, and the And I was very excited because when we had dinner with Trump, I was like, okay, he's having dinner with the libertarians. This is like a correction of his dinner with Kanye and Fuentes, right? Which was kind of an ambush. And I was like, Trump is the flood, not the dam, right? That's what everybody was saying. And which way is this going to go? National libertarianism or national socialism? Because whoever incorporates the national ideal has an automatic advantage and wins. If we stay socialist, the National Socialists always win. In Russia, Germany, everywhere, the National Socialists always win. Fox knew this. They wrote articles about it in 2019. We can't be afraid to adopt nationalist elements. They tried a little bit with their like glorification of Lincoln and FDR, but
Hmm.
it just couldn't be sold, and it was too against the ethos of the left. So that's
Hmm.
why I'm concerned about socialism on the new right versus the boomers, right? But yeah, so we were talking about Tucker,
Trump dinner. Yeah.
Trump. Oh yeah, yeah, right. So that's a correction of that. So I'm like, great. And I had this plan for deregulation before I talked to Trump, and then I saw that that's what he was thinking. Also, I was like, wow, this is incredible. Um,
Hmm.
and so I'm like, okay, Trump is pushing things in a libertarian direction, not a socialist direction, right? Which a lot of libertarians didn't understand. I'm like, look, Malay, deregulation. These are real things. These are big changes. Makes a big impact. It's libertarian ideas being delivered, libertarian success like we could have never dreamed of, and we've never secured ourselves. So, like, thank you, Mr. Trump, right? Um, and so I'm like, great, okay. Trump's pushing in the libertarian direction. That's the part I thought that would be the hardest. Turns out what was the hardest was getting libertarians to realize that. And instead of teaming up with Trump to take over the institutions, the perennial comfortable as a homeless guy libertarians um, teamed up with Nick Fuentes instead after
Hmm.
he had been pushed out of institutional power. And I'm like, oh my God, you guys, and this is not just libertarians, but people on the right who are always they're talking about elite power and being okay, well, I'm having dinner with Trump and you're talking about the Jews, which makes you look like an idiot to the people who actually control the world.
Hmm.
Um, and
Hmm.
and also it's just like the least successful elite politics play of all time, and it definitionally splits the right. And you can talk about
Hmm.
dispensationalism. That's fine. We should address that. The people have this idea that if you just like solve dispensationalism, the theological dispute there, which was the church is the people, not the land, which is pretty obviously, I think, correct. Not to say obvious around a theological debate. Um, but then people take that. This is like what happened in the Reformation, right? Where they combine their theological interpretation to a specific political outcome. They think that if they just teach the whole right about the dispensationalism thing, then the right will stop caring about Israel. But it turns out there's still a lot of reasons to care about Israel, and they love Israel. So if you want them to get rid of dispensationalism, don't attach it to like whatever worst thing they can imagine about how you view Israel or what you think
Yeah,
about.
then put them in a bind. Yeah, like you were
Right. And then
saying.
they're
Yeah.
not going to improve their theology. So is your motivation actually to make them better Christians, or is
Mm-hmm.
it to use it as a political cudgel?
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
because you could still say, hey, Israel's very valuable. It's a beautiful place. It's a developed country. It's like one of the only countries in the region with XYZ values. It has incredible historical, Christian heritage, archaeological sites. Um, it's a valuable thing. And also, who else would be pissed about us just like internationally condemning Israel like they're Rhodesia or something, which we should have supported? Um, then uh, you're not going to yeah, change people's minds on on that issue. Um,
What the right's true identity and goal is, its end.
yeah, and then talking about like usury and all these catchy stuff, like yeah, this is
Hmm.
not
You're
impressive to
triggering.
me.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
not impressive. Like, especially considering like one of Christianity's core things was overcoming the usury thing, because like Salamanca monks in the 1400s who observed that, oh, actually loaning money comes with both opportunity cost and risk, and you're not entitled to people's money. And the conception of usury is like around the king, because the nobles were the ones who used to basically have all the money. And so if someone taxes you for your money and then charges you big loans on it and there's no alternative source of finance, then that can get abusive and tricky. But just the conception of interest itself is not anti-biblical. And this is why one of the reasons we're more successful than the Muslims and the Jews. Well, the Jews is a side point. But both the Muslims and the Jews, there's differences, but they create semantic loopholes around interest. They all charge each other interest just like we do. They just call it investment or gains or
Mm-hmm.
loans or whatever it is. Um, and then they collect the money that would have been interest as like profit on. It's all semantic workaround. It's like when a Jew gets someone to turn on their electricity during Shabbat. Okay,
Yeah.
we don't
Yeah.
need
Or
to.
program their computer to do it for them. Yeah.
Us Christians don't need to do any of that stuff. Okay,
Yeah.
we don't need to start like talking about uh, usury outside of like Bernie Sanders or something. Like I don't want the right to turn into what's the guy during the Renaissance? Savonarola.
Mm-hmm.
Savonarola. I hear a lot of points on the right that sound more like Savonarola, right? He wasn't a Christian, he was a communist, and he destroyed Florence and then rightfully got his head chopped off. So like that is also in Europe. Okay, so not every guy talking
Mm-hmm.
about the Bible is in service of Christ. The Medici's were much more aligned with Christian values than Savonarola, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
They also built the Duomo, which we like. Savonarola did not build the Duomo. He made it impossible to build Duomos by making everybody poor. And this is what I'm worried about too from the identity lens, because identity is important. Another false dichotomy, right? We had the blank slate, race doesn't matter, blah 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 blah. The left introduces identity as something of supreme importance. The reality is identity is important, but it's not everything. But it's still important. So if you want to, this is why I make the comparison with Hitler, right? Because it's like, who actually did better for the expansion of the European population? Enlightenment England, which led to a diaspora 3 times the size of the entire population of France, or Hitler, who got multi-thousand-year-old, who like created a socialist mess, started invading other countries to like steal resources to keep the Ponzi scheme going, and then he got every multi-thousand-year-old German diaspora in Eastern Europe killed. Thousands of years old community Germans spread out all over Eastern Europe, all killed. He lost a third of the homeland and another like third of the German population, and then it just resulted in them being like gay and overwhelmed with Islamic immigrants 50
Mm-hmm.
years later, right? So I'm not very impressed with that. from. Uh, and I think
Hitler's not cool, actually.
it's like resentment, wealth, and inequality thing, right? Where the poor, they would rather hurt the rich than help themselves. It's like, would you rather get rid of Jews or double the population of Europeans? Like, what are your actual goals here? Um, and if we don't have people able to form their own families, afford houses, pursue opportunity, become integrated with meaning, then we're not going to recover our birth rate. And that is a variable that's also important relative to like how many immigrants do we deport, right? Like, do we deport another 3 million immigrants or do we double the population of Americans? Like, there's multiple factors to this equation that people are not really looking at. So, so History 102, it's a channel, YouTube, Spotify, etc. I co-host it with Rudyard Lynch from What If Alt Hist. He does most of the talking. I kind of try and make comparisons to other topics or find how the historical issues tie into modern politics. But it's a great examination of history and not through just the lens of like who won this battle. If they zigged right versus left, everything would have changed. But it's an analysis of the value structure, the anthropology, the philosophy, and not only that, but over time. So not just in a static frame. So you get kind of a more broad understanding of history, and we also are not communists. So even like even the best historians or something like Dan Carlin is going to have and this is a great example of how so much of the right is left, right? A lot of the right, their conception of the progressive era is identical about the working conditions and stuff, like the way Daryl Cooper talks about it, is identical to how my professor in France at the Sorbonne, who was a communist, talked about the industrial age, right? It's like the workers, if we didn't get the unions and if we didn't do this, then we'd be in these conditions forever. And in reality, it's the opposite of that. And we also had a lot of problems for poor European immigrants, which would be another fun thing we should talk about in another episode. Because I analyzed the cultural impact of Germans, for example. Like, let's look at that. Um, anyways, uh, yeah, it's a fun channel. And then the other place to find me is on X, Ludwig Never Mises, Austin Padgett, but Ludwig Never Mises is the handle, missing an E, but you should be able to find it if you put all that information together. So that and History 102. All right, peace.